Okay, so have you ever gotten into a business deal and then suddenly you're like, wait a second, the rules just totally changed and I don't remember agreeing to this?
Yeah. I mean, that can definitely happen, especially with small businesses, right?
Exactly. It's like you signed up for one thing and then boom, there are all these unexpected hurdles and it feels like you're totally stuck, especially if the other side has, way more power in the relationship.
Yeah, no, totally. And you see that a lot in franchise situations, right? Where you've got the big company,
Yeah.
the franchisor, they've got a lot of say over those smaller independent operators, the franchisees.
Right. And that power dynamic that's at the heart of what we're diving into today. And it all revolves around Print Cafe. You might also know them as UPISoft.
Right.
We've got this article that lays out some pretty serious allegations about some strong-arm tactics they're accused of using against their franchisees. And it specifically focuses on this whole issue of being forced to buy supplies from them, and even wilder claims that they shut down people's systems for not playing ball.
Yeah, that's right.
So just to make sure everyone's on the same page with what a franchise is, it's basically a setup where a big company licenses out its brand and its whole business model to these independent operators, like all those individual Print Cafe stores you see around.
Right, yeah, so they get to use the name and all that, but they're running their own location.
Exactly. And so what we're looking at here are claims that UPISoft might have used its control over essential tools like their computer systems and payment processing to force franchisees to buy their supplies from them.
Right. Pretty much make it impossible to operate without playing by their rules.
Exactly. And in this deep dive, we really want to get to the bottom of what's being alleged, how UPISoft is responding, and what experts have to say about this kind of situation.
Yeah, I mean, these are some serious allegations that could have a huge impact on both the franchisees and the company's reputation.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's start by breaking down what happened with one specific franchisee. We'll call him franchisee. According to this article, their initial agreement with UPISoft was back in November of 2022. Now, this is a key point. The original terms of that agreement didn't require them to buy supplies from the company. They had the flexibility to source their own stuff.
Right. Yeah, that's a pretty standard setup early on in a franchise agreement.
Yeah.
It gives the franchise some freedom to figure out their costs and maybe use suppliers they already have relationships with.
Exactly. They had that control over their supply chain. And then in 2024, things apparently changed. UPISoft reportedly made an amendment to the contract.
Oh.
And this amendment made it mandatory for franchisees to buy all their supplies directly from them. The reason they gave was to maintain brand quality.
Okay, so a couple things jump out at me right away.
Yeah.
First, how they supposedly implemented this change. Through an internal announcement, no real discussion with the franchisees or, trying to get their agreement.
Right.
If that's how it went down, that raises serious questions about whether it was fair and even legal to just impose a change like that, especially when it hits franchisees in the pocketbook and messes with how they run their business.
Right. And I mean, that's such a classic example of the power imbalance in these situations, right?
Totally. The franchisor essentially saying, you have to do this because we said so.
Exactly. And franchise A claims they kept buying supplies from outside sources because they were getting the same quality, but for less money.
Makes sense from a business perspective, trying to keep those costs down.
And this is where things allegedly escalated. The article details these actions that UPISoft supposedly took in response. We're talking about shutting down the store's computer and payment systems.
Oh.
And this started right after franchise A continued to buy supplies externally.
So basically they're saying, hey, if you don't buy from us, we'll make it so you can't even do business.
Right. And that's a huge takeaway for anyone who's in a similar agreement with a bigger company. It shows how much control they might have over your operations. It's not just about the money. It's about being able to keep your doors open.
That's a scary thought. You're at their mercy.
Yeah. And the condition for getting their systems back online, they had to agree to buy supplies from UPISoft franchisee, went so far as to file a police report on December 17, 2024 for business obstruction. But according to the article, the terminal shutdowns just kept happening into January 2025.
So they're escalating the situation despite legal action. That's a bold move.
Yeah, it's really concerning because it goes beyond just a contract dispute now. It's like they were allegedly preventing this franchisee from running their business.
The fact that it kept going even after a police report was filed definitely suggests that UPISoft was taking a hard line. Maybe they felt they were totally justified in doing this, but it definitely paints a picture of them holding all the cards.
Exactly. And here's a direct quote from Franchise A in the article. They made it impossible to operate the business just because I didn't purchase supplies from the head office. Isn't this blatant coercion?
Yeah, I mean, that sums up their feelings pretty clearly. They felt trapped and bullied.
The article also mentions an incident on November 8, 2024, where franchise A claims that UPISoft actually went into the store without their permission, turned off terminals, and blocked payments.
Hold on, that sounds way out of line. Even within a franchise agreement, you can't just barge into someone's business and start messing with their stuff.
Right, and that's what franchise A is alleging. It raises serious questions about whether UPISoft was respecting the franchisee's independent business ownership.
Totally. It's like they completely overstepped their boundaries.
And get this, franchise A also claims that UPISoft tried to pressure them to drop their complaint with the Fair Trade Commission in exchange for getting their systems back up and running and signing a supply purchase agreement.
Whoa, okay, so now they're bringing in the FTC.
Right, and just so everyone knows, the Fair Trade Commission is basically a government body that makes sure businesses are playing fair and that consumers are protected.
Right, so using the ability to do business as leverage to get someone to drop a legal complaint, that's definitely something the FTC would want to look into.
Yeah. Exactly. It could be seen as trying to avoid scrutiny from the authorities.
And it really makes you think about just how far a company might go to get their way in these situations.
So eventually, franchise A felt they couldn't keep the business going under these conditions, and they terminated the contract on February 3, 2025. After that, they filed a formal complaint with the Fair Trade Commission for unfair trade practices.
So they're going head-to-head with the company now. This is getting serious.
Okay, so that's one side of the story. Now let's hear how Printkafe, or UPISoft, is responding to these allegations.
Okay, so their counter-arguments boil down to this. They say they followed all the franchise business laws, and that franchise A was actually the one who ended the agreement after violating operational guidelines.
Okay.
Specifically, they mentioned unauthorized dilution of the head office's management program as a breach of contract.
So they're shifting the blame, saying franchise A messed up and that's why they took action.
Right. They're trying to paint a picture of franchise A being the one who caused problems and that their actions justified ending the agreement.
But the timing of everything is still a big issue, right?
Totally. The alleged system shutdown seemed to have happened before franchise A ended the contract. So it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Right. And UPISoft also officially stated that they needed to control supplies like copy paper and consumables to make sure the quality was consistent across the board.
Right. That's their big justification for the mandatory purchase policy.
Yeah, and wanting to maintain brand quality, that's a common thing for franchisors. It makes sense. They want to make sure everything is up to their standards.
Yeah, of course. But the question is whether forcing franchisees to buy all their supplies from them is the only way or even the most reasonable way to do that.
Right.
And you have to wonder about how this policy was put in place. Was it fair to the franchisees? Did they have a say?
Exactly. They also clarified that while the original contract might have allowed buying supplies from outside with their approval, the current contract, the one with the amendment, makes those supplies mandatory.
So they're saying it's all spelled out in black and white.
And that's a good reminder for everyone listening. Pay close attention to your contracts and make sure you understand what you're agreeing to, especially if you're in a franchise or any kind of agreement with a bigger company. Things can change, and it's important to know where you stand legally.
Absolutely. Those contracts are binding. And it's crucial to make sure everyone's on the same page about the terms and that any changes are made fairly and transparently.
So UPISoft also pointed out that all their franchise contracts are managed according to the Franchise Business Act and that they're reported to the Fair Trade Commission.
So they're basically saying we're doing everything by the book.
Right, but following the law doesn't automatically mean that everything they're doing is fair.
Exactly. The Fair Trade Commission will be looking at how the law is actually being applied in this situation, especially when it comes to changing the contract and how they dealt with the alleged violations.
Right, and just for context, UPISoft has been around for a while. They started developing their unmanned print service tech back in 2017. Their first store opened in 2019, and they've got something like 200 stores nationwide now.
Okay, so they're not some fly-by-night operation. They've been building this business for a while.
Right, but even established businesses can be accused of unfair practices.
Totally. Their track record doesn't excuse them if they've done something wrong.
Okay, so now let's bring in some expert and legal perspectives to get a broader view.
That's good.
In the article, a Fair Trade Commission official said that they need to carefully examine the specifics of the franchise contract because each side might be telling a slightly different story.
Right, it's their job to remain neutral and look at the facts objectively.
Exactly. And the FTC official also mentioned that requiring franchisees to buy supplies to maintain brand quality that might not necessarily be a problem for a business like Printkafe.
Right, in some cases it might be completely legitimate.
Mm.
But the key point is that it's not always okay. The FTC is going to be looking at whether there were any unreasonable or unfair practices when they changed the contract and how they handled the alleged violations.
Right. It all comes back to how they enforce those changes. Were the system shutdowns too extreme?
That's the big question.
We also hear from someone on the ESG promotion committee of the ICE.
Okay, ESG, that stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance, right?
Right. And they basically question whether it's okay for a company to take actions that could hurt a franchisee's ability to make a living, even if they're saying it's about operational guidelines.
Right, so they're bringing in the ethical side of things.
Yeah.
Even if UPISoft had the right to enforce certain rules, did they go too far and harm the franchisee's livelihood?
Exactly. And they emphasize how vulnerable franchisees can be in these relationships. They're saying that shutting down their operations like that can easily be seen as a form of coercion.
Yeah, that really highlights that power imbalance again. The franchisee has a lot on the line, and they depend on the franchisor for support. If the franchisor uses that dependence against them, that's a problem.
Right. And the ESG committee members suggest that if the goal was really about quality and good customer service, there might have been other ways to handle this besides just shutting down everything.
Right, like maybe more communication or performance improvement plans or even fines that don't completely shut down the business.
Right, because the way they allegedly responded, it makes you wonder what their real motivations were.
Totally. Were they really just trying to uphold standards, or was there something else going on?
And finally, the article brings up Article 13 of the Franchise Business Act. This article says that a franchisor needs to get the franchisee's agreement for any big changes to the contract after the initial agreement is signed.
Okay, so you can't just change the rules on them after they've already signed up.
Exactly. And it says that just making changes and telling the franchisee about it, that might be considered an unfair trade practice.
So if UPISoft changed the contract about mandatory supplies without getting clear consent from the franchisees, they could be in violation of the law.
And that's something the Fair Trade Commission will be looking at very closely.
Absolutely. This could have serious legal implications for UPISoft if they didn't follow the proper procedures.
So to sum it all up, the core issue here is a disagreement over changes to the contract, specifically who controls the supply chain and how UPISoft allegedly went about enforcing those changes, which led to the system shutdown.
Right. And it all circles back to that power dynamic between franchisors and franchisees. The franchisor often has more leverage in how the agreement is interpreted and enforced. And like the ESG committee member pointed out, that can create a situation where the franchisee is very vulnerable.
It also underscores how important it is to have clear communication and real agreement when you're making changes to a contract that significantly impact a franchisee's business and their ability to make money.
Absolutely. You can't just switch things up on them after they've already invested in the franchise.
And this case really shows how important regulatory bodies like the Fair Trade Commission are. They step in to investigate these kinds of disputes, make sure things are being done fairly, and protect franchisees who might not have a lot of power on their own.
Right. They're the watchdogs, making sure everyone plays by the rules.
So for you, the listener, what does this all mean? Well, if you're running a small business, especially within a franchise system, this case is a reminder to really understand the contract you're signing. Be aware of your rights and recognize those potential power imbalances. And think about how disagreements are handled. Are the methods being used fair and reasonable?
It's about knowing what you're getting into and making sure you're protected.
And it also makes you think about business relationships in general.
Yeah.
Even when there are laws in place, are businesses acting in a way that respects their partners, like in this case, the franchisees?
Right. It's about using that power responsibly.
Okay, so we've taken this deep dive into the Printkafe situation. We've looked at the allegations, how the company has responded, and what the experts have to say. And the main tension here seems to be finding that balance between a franchisor's need to keep their brand consistent and the rights and independence of each individual franchisee.
It's a tough balancing act, for sure.
And to leave you with something to think about, given everything we've discussed, what does this case tell us about the responsibilities that franchisors have and the rights that franchisees should expect? What are the bigger implications for how businesses should operate within a franchise model to make sure things are fair and transparent for everyone involved?
It's a complex issue with a lot of gray areas, but hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of what's going on in this dispute.
And maybe it'll spark some conversations about how we can make these relationships more balanced and equitable for everyone.
Exactly, because at the end of the day, a successful franchise system relies on both sides working together and feeling like they're being treated fairly.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the print cafe situation. We'll keep you updated on any new developments in this case.
And in the meantime, keep those contracts close and read the fine print.
We'll see you next time.
See you later.